Hello again, students. How's it going? I know it's been a long time, but welcome back to the VLP Network. I am your instructor, Holland, as always. And I know it's been a while, but there are some reasons for that. First reason is the biggest reason. I'm sure you can probably tell just from the surrounding area. My background is different. Everything's a little bit different. That's because I'm not recording videos in my apartment anymore. I actually moved to a house, so I have a lot more room to not only record videos, but also test some fun things that we're going to do for some different classes. If you are new to the channel, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button if you enjoy what you see and like what you hear. For those of you that are new here, my channel focuses on preparation. Preparation meaning being a prepared human individual, not just for yourself, but also for your family and your loved ones. So that way we can go throughout the world, we can go throughout life as an individual who's prepared for really any situation. Like I said, my name is Holland. I'll be your instructor here on this network. I'm a former Marine Corps veteran as well as a martial arts expert, former MMA fighter, and I was also an executive protection agent. So today's class, we're going to talk about self-defense weapons, but not self-defense weapons as you might be thinking. We're going to be talking about self-defense weapons that are environmental weapons, things that we can use in our environment or things that we might have on our person that in a pinch can be used as weapons for self-defense. And probably the number one weapon that always gets told to people to be used as a weapon for self-defense that is just a tool on your person is your car keys. This is something that you hear, parents tell their children or fathers tell their daughters all the time. Hey, make sure that you have your keys in your hand when you're walking to the car, so that way if somebody comes up and tries to grab onto you, you can, stick them with the tip of the key here. But is that really effective? Well, that's what we're going to test out today. Now, I'm happy to announce, because I now live in a much larger building and I actually have a backyard and stuff like that, I have a little bit of a surprise for you guys. I don't have to travel out so far anymore to the range in order to show certain things that I would like to show. I actually can do some tests over here. So today's class is always going to be broken up into two specific parts. We're going to have the classroom portion where we're going to discuss very briefly some ideology and some knowledge, and then we're going to go out back, and as always, we're going to do our practical application testing. And when we go out back, you guys are going to see what I have set up. We're going to have a little bit of fun, but it's also going to be, for science. So without any further talking, let class begin. Okay guys, so when talking about utilizing certain tools for self-defense, the question I think a lot of the time that gets bogged down is, can I use this thing as a tool for self-defense? And the obvious answer is yes. Yes, you can. If we're talking about keys in this case, which is what today's class is going to be on, can I use my keys for self-defense? Well, the obvious answer is yes. Yes, I can use my keys for self-defense. I can take them and I can try my best to, stab somebody with the tip of the key or whatever, utilize them in some other ways that we're going to demonstrate outside. But the obvious answer is yes. The question is not whether or not I can use them. The question is whether or not it's going to be effective. Let's say somebody kicked down my door right now and I was not a trained individual. I was a stay-at-home mom, or I was, a father trying to stay home with his kids, or I was a kid who was home alone and I needed to defend myself in a pinch because I was in a panic on the fly. Somebody comes in, I need to grab something immediately, and in a blind panic I pick up, I don't know, let's see what's in front of me right now, my TV remote, for example. The question is always, can you use a TV remote as a self-defense tool? Well, the answer is yes. Yes, I can try my best to use this as a self-defense tool. But is it going to be effective? Well, unless you're like John Wick, who's, stabbing people with pencils and stuff like that, or in this case, stabbing people with TV remotes, I don't think that a TV remote in a really serious no-holds-barred fight is going to be the most effective weapon. So let's get rid of that right now. If we're talking about using objects in our environment as tools for self-defense, don't think of the question, can I use it? Think of the question, if I do use it, is it going to be effective? Now, if we're discussing keys as a self-defense tool, obviously keys are going to be much more effective than what I just showed, the TV remote. And that's because the keys have several factors about them that the TV remote does not. Keys are metal, keys are sharp, they have, the striations on them where the tumblers and the lock have to fit in when you put it inside the lock. They're pointed to a certain extent so they can penetrate with a decent amount of force. They are metal, you can get a whole lot of attachments to your keys. A lot of the time people have different decorative things that increases the weight, and whenever you have something that is heavier, if it is swung at a high speed, a heavier device is obviously going to cause more damage. So the keys can be effective. The question is, how effective are they going to be against an attacker? As we've discussed on this channel before, an attacker coming at you is going to have several different factors that we need to also bring into play if we're going to think about whether or not the keys are going to be effective in stopping the attack. You guys know on this channel that I like to talk about the 3 Ds a lot of the time, and that's drunk, deranged, or on drugs. If a suspect is one of these things, or a combination of those things, the fight is going to be much, much more difficult, and that's because drugs, alcohol, or a deranged state of mind a lot of the time can cause a person to do things or have abilities that a person who isn't under the influence of those things don't have. Things like a much higher pain tolerance and stuff like that, which can cause an individual to be much, much more difficult to fight back against. But at the same time, you also have a lot of examples of individuals who get attacked, and just by the act of simply fighting back, the payoff is not big enough at that point for the attacker. Fighting back a lot of the time does certain things like creating a lot of noise, creating a scene, and somebody who is trying to abduct you, someone who is trying to mug you and steal your stuff at that moment, does not really want to attract a whole lot of attention. So you'd be surprised how many times when people fight back, situations often quickly resolve themselves because in the perpetrator's mind, the payoff is not worth what the effort is needed to take that individual. So based on the situation that we're dealing with, let's say we're dealing with somebody who's drunk, deranged, or on drugs, or let's say we're dealing with somebody who's not under the influence of anything and is not willing to put up a fight against somebody who's resisting. Are the keys going to be effective enough to stop an attacker who's either one or the other? Well, let's figure that out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over some common ways that I've seen and some common ways that I've been taught on how to use keys for self-defense. And then let's go over some ways that, in my personal opinion, I would think that using keys for self-defense would be better. And then let's go out back into the backyard and let's test it once again for science. So one of the most common ways that I've seen people tell their daughters or tell their children on how to use keys for self-defense is probably one of the most common ways, and that's to take the key and to place it in between your fingers like so, and then when someone comes at you, to punch with the key in order to get the tip to penetrate the person's body. I'll be honest with you, I have never been a big fan of that. I think it's horribly ineffective. It does depend on the key, but in this case, regular house keys like my house key right here, I really don't feel like this is gonna be an effective thing. All right, when I put it in between my fingers like so, I have always felt, and this is something I've always thought about, when I try and push this into somebody's body, I think the force is going to be enough to push the key back down into my fingers like that, and I'm not going to get any penetration. The reason is because skin is actually tougher than most people think. If you guys have never, I really sincerely hope, obviously, you haven't stabbed anybody before, but you'd be surprised at how difficult it is to try and stab or penetrate somebody's skin with something that is not as sharp as, let's say, a knife. Something like this is going to take a lot of pressure and a lot of force in order to penetrate. You might not be able to generate that force physically yourself because maybe you're somebody who is of smaller stature, or the key itself is just not sharp enough to penetrate because, again, several keys are different. So instead of placing the key in between your knuckles like this or in between your fingers, my preferred method on how to stab somebody with the key, if I ever needed to do it, would be to take the key and put it between my pointer finger and my thumb. This is the way I used to teach my students and my female students, stuff like that, when they asked me about how to whether use keys for self-defense or not. I would tell them to take it, put it between the large knuckle of your pointer finger, and then take your thumb and kind of create like a little pincer move right here, just like so. And once it's like that, I can still throw it just like a right hand or just like a right straight punch, but it's much more based, and that's because I have my fingers putting pressure onto the key itself, and this part of my finger right here acts as a stopgap for the key so it doesn't slide whenever I end up hitting something. But trust me, we're going to test both of these methods. Another method that I really, really like, which I haven't talked about a lot, but I haven't really seen a lot, is actually just kind of whipping somebody with the keys in the face. Now, whipping somebody with the keys in the face is not necessarily going to cause a bunch of structural damage or incapacitating damage, but trust me, if I came over and I whipped you in the face with my keys like this, okay, it would probably really, really suck. If you are somebody who is not one of the 3 Ds and you are just a attacker who's coming over to try and mug or trying to kidnap or trying to take somebody's wallet or something, getting whipped in the face with the keys, boom, right across the face, would suck and probably would not make you want to deal with that person anymore. The downside, like I said, to whipping somebody in the face with the keys is that, again, you're not causing really any incapacitating damage. If somebody has a very high pain threshold, taking something and whipping them in the face with it is not necessarily going to cause them to stop at all. Trust me, guys, I've seen videos of people who are high on PCP and people who are high on drugs take incredible amounts of damage and incredible amounts of pain and act like absolutely nothing happened. And so if you have seen some of the videos that I have seen and experienced some of the things that I've experienced when it comes to dealing with people with drugs, you know that whipping somebody in the face with these things is not going to stop them, and you're going to have to rely on much more serious methods. Now, what I would highly recommend everybody do is go out and get a decent carabiner. You can get them over at Walmart, you can get them over at Home Depot, any sort of supply store and stuff like that. Go get a decent carabiner, because you can wrap your fingers through the carabiner and you can use the carabiner as a base to try and whip somebody in the face with the keys when you need to. I don't necessarily like utilizing your car attachment here, like, you know, your key fob, because it's attached with these rings, the circular rings right here that you attach all your keys to. The reason I don't like that is because these things have failed on me before, where you know, just by getting pulled a little bit, they've extended and my keys have gone flying. I've had to end up, you know, searching on the ground to find them and stuff like that. So if they can get stretched out and you can lose keys and stuff like that, just from, you know, them getting pulled a little bit, what do you think is going to happen when you're trying to swing this thing, because you're in a very serious self-defense scenario? Not necessarily something that I think would be a good idea. For that reason, I think getting a carabiner like this is a much more solid base than these tiny little, you know, circular things that you put your keys on. So we have primarily three methods. We have the one that everyone talks about, which is the, you know, the knuckle thing here. We have my preferred method, which is to wrap your pointer finger and your thumb around it, kind of base it on the inside right here like this, and then punch with it. And then you also have whipping somebody with the keys. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back out into the back of the classroom. We're going to go out into my backyard, where I have a little thing that I built set up for you guys, and we're going to do some practical application. So let's take this class outside, take the keys with us, and go run some experiments. Okay, students, so we're outside now to conduct the practical application and testing portion of our video on whether or not keys are going to be an effective self-defense tool. I have a key ring right here. I should note that I'm not going to use my personal keys because I don't want to damage them. I don't want to get them disgusting. I don't want to cause any issues with them. So they're just a bunch of keys that I found around the house. I really don't know what they go to anymore. I'm sure everyone has these random keys lying around their house as well. So you can just pick them up if you want to do your own testing. And I attach them to a carabiner and stuff like that, just to kind of make up a little setup that's similar to what you would carry in your car. And we're going to use this special little thing that I've developed here with, you know, my amazing carpentry and engineering skills. So what we have here is a piece of plywood followed by two 2x4s that have been drilled and nailed together. And on top here we have these three nails that are jutting out. One of them is kind of loose. I didn't do that very well maybe. But we're going to use this to hold our targets, which are going to be pumpkins. We are done with Halloween and we don't really decorate much for Thanksgiving. So we're going to use these pumpkins as a basis for what we're going to test on. Now, it's worth noting the reason that we're using pumpkins is because they have the relative size, shape, and density of a human skull. Obviously, a skull is going to be harder, made of bone, but the pumpkins are the closest thing I can find, as well as they've been outside for a little while now, so they've been sitting in the cold weather. They've become harder because of that. And I think that's the best thing that I have with me at the moment that's going to be a good generalized basis to create, you know, a good test. So we're going to conduct the test in three separate phases. I'm going to use the three techniques that I talked about in the classroom inside. The first one being, you know, between the knuckles. I'm going to place the key between my knuckle and punch one of the pumpkins. Next, I'm going to do it the way that I prefer, which is to take it and put it between my pointer finger and my thumb and try and punch it that way. And then I'm going to use the keys to swing against the pumpkin and see how much damage that's going to cause. At the end, we're going to look at the results and we're going to see how much penetration we get and also how much surface area damage we get based upon those three methods, and see whether or not that would actually be effective in stopping an attacker. All right, so let's, boom. That actually works pretty well. Okay, so like I said, the first test is gonna be between the knuckles. I have a big key here. Again, like I said, every key is kind of shaped differently and kind of, you know, different, but this one seems big enough for me to put between my knuckles like so, like that. All right, as you can see, it's jutting out pretty well. And I'm gonna punch the pumpkin. Let's see how much damage this causes. As you can see, the pumpkin's already starting to break. I don't know if it's because of my punching or if it's because of the actual keys themselves, but we do have some good penetrating shots right here. As you can see right here, this is a penetration, this is a penetration, and this is a penetration. I will say though, it is quite uncomfortable to be punching something like this. I'm feeling it more on my knuckles than I am with the key, but we'll try it 1 or 2 more times. Let's see how it goes. Okay guys, so the first test results are actually pretty good. We have some decent penetration here. The pumpkin is splitting in half, but the shots are not that bad actually. I'm getting some pretty good penetration. If you were hitting a soft target like the eyes or something like that, I could see this working. I will definitely say, however, it is quite uncomfortable. On the last shot there, one of the keys actually dug really hard into my palm here, hurt pretty bad. I'm missing some skin now. And also I feel like it was hitting more of my knuckles than I was getting the actual key. So probably not the most comfortable method, but will it work in a pinch? Sure. So let's move on to test number 2. Now, like I said, test number 2 is gonna be with the method that I showed before, which is to take the key, put it between your pointer finger and your thumb, and you can still throw a right hand like you would normally throw a right hand. It's just gonna be more pronounced because the key is here. All right, let's try it. This pumpkin's almost done, but let's try it a few more times. Okay guys, so you can see the pumpkin has completely failed. The structural integrity is gone, but I can see some of the penetrating shots here. Penetration is actually pretty good too. I'd say it's relatively the same as the key between the knuckle method, but the thing that I noticed about this method was that I felt like I had more stability and I felt like I could hit multiple consecutive times, whereas with the key between the knuckle method, I felt like the key was getting pushed back down, which is what I was saying before. Maybe you only need one good shot with that key in order to stop the guy, but these consecutive hits can also be an advantage. My poor delivery system has failed. I guess I'm not the best carpenter, but that's okay. We only need to hold it together for one more test, and that's gonna be whipping the keys into the target. Luckily, I have one more pumpkin. Okay guys, so now let's go into whipping the target with the keys. Let's see how much damage this is gonna cause. Just for safety, I'm gonna put my PPE on to ensure that nothing goes wrong. Here we go, let's test it out. Well, I am covered in pumpkin, but take a look at this damage right here. Obviously, this is exterior damage. You know, this is not going to cause any sort of incapacitation in terms of like long-term incapacitation. Obviously, if this hit somebody to the eyes or anything like that, that would totally suck. If you had low pain tolerance, this would also totally suck. But if you were, you know, drunk, deranged, or on drugs, one of the 3 Ds, and your pain tolerance was very, very high, this would probably not be the most effective method. There is some penetration here, but mostly it's exterior surface damage, and would absolutely suck to get hit in the face with keys. Don't get me wrong, but yeah. Not as much penetrating damage as we see. There's one down here that's relatively deep, but you know, you want to, the nicer of the 3 options I'd say would be to whip somebody in the face with the keys if you're not trying to cause any sort of serious internal damage. Now, the primary issue with this method obviously is the structural integrity of your keys. You can see that I only have some keys left, and that's because of what I was talking about before. The rings here kind of failed. I mean, as you can see here, I have keys that have completely come off the rings, and I can't even find the rings. So I don't know where they went. They must have failed completely and just, you know, broken off. And that's because obviously they're not meant to deal with that kind of force, right? I also noticed that this specific carabiner as well, this cheapo one that I got from Walmart right here, was bent to the side a little bit. It was already kind of loose before I used it. So I highly suggest if you're gonna pick up a carabiner, you pick up a better one. This one's from Black & Diamond. This one is pretty hardy and pretty hefty, and I suspect would be able to take a lot more damage than this one right here. I will say though that that is the most comfortable method in my opinion. Just taking your finger, wrapping it around the ring pull, and just slashing back and forth. Maybe you have the keys down by your side, you're standing here, you just whip it up into the guy really quick. If I'm just standing here, I have my fence up or something, hey man, relax, I don't want any problems, boom, and you come up and you nail the guy with the keys in the face. You come up, you come down, you come across, you know, you could string together attacks very easily with this. And it would absolutely suck to get hit in the face with them. But just keep in mind, we didn't get as much penetration as we did with the key between the fingers method or the key between the pointer finger and the thumb method. So let's go inside and kind of talk about the results a little bit. Okay, students, so what did our super scientific testing results find? Well, let's go over each one of the methods that I talked about and the ones that we tested outside, and let's kind of go over what we found. Starting off with the keys between the fingers method, between the knuckles here, I actually think that it did better than I thought it would. I have to admit I had never tested this method before, but after trying it out there, while it still is not my preferred method, I am a little bit more impressed and do think that in a pinch it could work better. The penetration was the full length of the key all the way up to my knuckles here, and it still worked really, really well, even though the key kept getting pushed down in my fingers. And that's probably one of the biggest problems, right? If the key gets pushed down into your fingers, you have to readjust it every single time, and you're not going to be able to hit consecutively with it. Hopefully that one shot is hard enough to incapacitate the guy and take him out of the fight. If it's not, well then you're going to have to readjust and try and get your keys back between your knuckles. Now I have relatively large hands. For someone who has smaller hands, you might be able to compress the keys better. The keys might fit better in your hand. Or if you have a much larger key, I don't know, some keys, like I said, are designed differently, then maybe those keys would work better. Just because you have to keep readjusting it, and also it hurt my hands to do that. The keys that I didn't have between my knuckle, the ones that I had in my palm, were digging around and, you know, taking some skin off and stuff like that. So probably not the most comfortable method, and only good for really one shot, especially if you have big hands like mine. So now the keys between the pointer finger and the thumb. This is still my preferred method just because I felt like I had much more stability. The keys didn't shift at all. I didn't have to readjust it. I could get consecutive hits in. I could still throw with quite a bit of power. The only reason I didn't was because I had to stabilize the thing holding up the pumpkins because it had broke on the last test. But all in all, I can still rotate. I can still throw a big proper right hand if I needed to. I feel like I could target better with this as well. I can feel like I would be able to throw this and get it right on the precise point that I wanted to, just because of how the key is oriented in my hand. If I put it between my knuckles and I throw a punch, I feel like I'd be less accurate with the keys themselves, and I feel like it would just be more of a punch rather than a targeted strike with the key to where I want to put it. Just make sure the key is big enough to where it can extend past this pointer knuckle right here, because if it's not and you try and punch with it, you're going to hit with this knuckle, and that's never good. Penetration was relatively the same in my opinion. I still got the full length of the key inside the target, so the penetration was not better or worse than the key between the knuckle method. And that's why I teach this method to students. That's why I taught it to female students who came in asking about using keys as weapons. I feel like it is just a much better, much stabler method to use than the key between the knuckles. And last, moving on to whipping the keys into the target. By far, this one had the least amount of penetrative power, but that's for obvious reasons. We're not taking a single key and thrusting it into a target. We're taking multiple keys on the carabiner or on your, your lanyard, whatever you have the keys on, and we're just kind of whipping it. And the effects are going to be different, right? We saw much more surface level exterior damage than we did penetrating trauma. Does that mean it's more effective or less effective? Not necessarily. It just depends on the situation that's occurring. If you are not trying to stab somebody in the eye or in the throat, because that's a very serious situation, and I really hope none of you ever have to do that or ever want to do that, but you still find yourself in a situation that's escalated to the point where you might need to hit somebody with something, the keys, whipping them into the target, is probably going to be a very, very, very serious shot to take on the part of the bad guy. I mean, seriously, think about it. You saw me whipping the keys into the target like that. Imagine if that pumpkin was your head. Do you think that that would have felt good? Do you think that pain would have been manageable? Me personally, I think that would have really, really sucked to get hit with. And at the same time, I still wasn't able to achieve the maximum amount of swinging power that I had, because part of my body was spent trying to hold up the target because of my crappy carpentry skills. The target holder had broken, so I had to stabilize that while whipping. So I wasn't able to get my full hip into it. I wasn't able to get my full shoulder and really get that arc of destruction going that creates a lot of damage at certain focal points during a circular type of attack. Remember though, the downside was that you saw at the end I had lost keys, and hopefully the keys that you lose during that fight while you're whipping the guy with it are not the keys you need to get into your car, start your vehicle, get into your home, whatever the situation is. So make sure that the key that you're holding on to maybe to swing is the key that you really, really need. For that reason, you got to make sure that the stuff that you're using is good quality materials, like a good carabiner or something like that. This helps make sure that the structural integrity of the thing that you're using is not going to snap off the moment you try and use it. So all in all three methods are viable. I thought the very first method, the keys between the knuckles, was not going to be as viable as I thought. It's still not my preferred method. I still wouldn't highly recommend it. But in a pinch, if you end up putting it between your knuckle and you punch the guy and it works, hey, it works. But I like techniques and I like methods, as we all know on this channel, that help better prepare you for most situations and are almost always, not always, but almost always going to be foolproof. And in my opinion, whipping the keys into the target or pushing it between your pointer finger and your thumb and stabbing that way, striking that way, is going to be a much more effective technique because it's going to have less of a failure option. So all in all, I guess my conclusion is whip the keys or put it that method and strike that way. Those are still my preferred methods. So that's it, students. I really hope you enjoyed the class today. I hope you liked our little demonstration outside. We always like to do things on this channel for science. And for those of you that were wondering about whether keys can be used as a weapon, yes, they can. Obviously, the tests show that they can be quite devastating. But obviously, carrying a weapon that is designed to be used as a weapon is always our best option. A firearm, a knife, a kubatana, something like that. And make sure we have the proper training necessary to use those weapons, not just carrying them and having no training, because that's only half the battle there. You got to make sure that if you have the tool, you know how to use it and you're proficient in how to use it. But in a pinch, yes, I believe keys could be quite effective. If you like what you saw, you enjoy what you heard, please, you know what to click and you know what to do. I hope everyone is having a safe November. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving, and I hope you had a good Halloween. Stay safe and stay prepared because, as we all know, victory loves preparation. Until next time, students, class is dismissed.